is actually sound, right? That episode comes later towards the end of the series, but sound in and of itself is a beautiful psychedelic because it helps bring our minds kind of here and present. And so I love to start these spaces out with a little bit of a sound meditation, and we'll work with the breath, right? Because if anything, at bare minimum, what we all have in common is that we breathe, right? It's the first thing we'll all do, and it'll be the last thing that we all do is breathe. So I like to bring in some breath work into this meditation. And as you saw before the show, there were some agreements up on the screen, and I'll repeat those in this meditation. And I just find it so important because these are sensitive topics we're discussing, right? This is like the cutting edge. This is like the alternative merging with like a new paradigm is shifting, right? So we do want to be safe, we do want to be confidential, and we do want to be as a community in this space. So I'll read those agreements again, and then we'll get started with this discussion. So if we can just begin with everyone closing their eyes. And beginning by exhaling out all the air you came in with. And together, taking a deep inhale and letting it go. Let's do one more as a community, inhaling and exhaling. For a few moments, just recognizing your own breath. Allowing your own natural rhythms to emerge. Feeling how with every inhale, you are creating space within your body. And how with every inhale, you are saying yes to life. And drawing all your awareness now to your exhales. Feeling them just gently cascade down your spine, settling into your hips. Feeling them root and ground you in the present moment experience. And in this space of presence and awareness, we draw in the agreements of this space. We agree to share talking time and be mindful of the impact of our speech. We agree to use curiosity, open questions, and exploration versus advice giving. We agree to be mindful of not outing names or groups that facilitate psychedelic use. We agree to maintain confidentiality of all that is shared during this discussion. We agree to practice openness and compassion towards all that is shared here. And we agree to focus on the topic of psychedelics and DMT as the basis for our discussion this evening. Feeling deeply into your breath. Filling up the entire lung space into the deep parts of our belly. And letting a few exhales release you here. And starting to become aware now of this theater, this space, of sitting in these amazingly comfy chairs at the moment. And as you're ready, starting to flutter open your eyes. Welcome, you guys. Thank you again for being here. I'm going to invite our panelists up to the stage now. Join me. All right, you guys, so while they get on up here, I'm going to start to introduce them because these are some of my favorite people right up here. So I'm super excited that they're here to share in this discussion and share their erudition and whatnot and their experiences here with you this evening. So right here we have Miss Debi. She is absolutely phenomenal. She actually does brain mapping. So, and she's done it on several people with psychedelics, my own brain included a couple nights ago, where she actually can see how the medicine is working in the brain, the different things that light up and whatnot. So super excited about her expertise here this evening. So thank you for being here. You guys may recognize this dude here from the episode. This is Daniel McQueen. Super excited for him to be here. Maybe don't need more of an introduction. There it is, you know. This is John Larchick here. You were listening to his music via JL Universe when you came in here this morning, or this evening. He has this just amazing ability to capture experiences and translate them through lyrics and music, and it's just, he has this amazing offering and inspired by these types of experiences. So I'm so excited to have him here this evening. And then Skye here I actually met through Medicinal Mindfulness and the Psychedelic Sitter School training that we offer. Daniel kind of leads. And she has much experience in the 5-MeO world. And one of my favorite things about her is her amazing ability to hold space for journeys. You know, she recognized, well, we all do, but she exhibits really so strongly the ability to just be with people when they're going through here. So she has just this brilliant insight across the board, and I'm really excited. She's here from California. Did I say that? So super excited to have her here in Colorado in time for this. So here's Daniel. And so the way that this kind of works is I'll ask a few initial questions, but really this is about the community, like being able to answer the questions that you have and being able to draw in this discussion and education to kind of lift up these amazing medicines and experiences. So I'll start with a few questions and then we'll open it up. We do have mic runners in the Good Cinema shirts. So we will have a mic for you. So raise your hand, they'll come find you or I'll come find you, and then you'll be able to ask your questions. So my first question would be for Daniel. You know, in the episode, they talk about how, you know, psychedelics, a lot of psychedelics shift this world that we live in, the consensus reality. The distinguishing factor for DMT is that it's a completely different reality. Can you speak to what that space is like and what's happening in there?
Sure. Is this on?
There we go. Can you hear me now? Yeah, well, I just want to thank everyone for having me. This is really exciting to be here. And thanks to Megan and for hosting us on Good Cinema. It was my first experience seeing myself on a theater screen, watching it. So that was new. It was a little bit like DMT, maybe. So how is DMT different than other psychedelics, and what's actually going on? And the answer is I'm not 100% sure at all. And it's the most intriguing and mysterious experience I've personally ever had. But like what Rick Strassman was saying, you know, it's a sudden, like a reformation of our experience of all of reality. And sometimes we can feel conscious of our bodies, but a lot of times we're completely somewhere else, or we seem to step into a space of maybe pure awareness, where we're just a pinpoint of consciousness, exploring this space that, like I said in the episode, that seems to transcend more than four-dimensional space. And so one of the ways I've been able to maybe wrap my head around it is by watching like YouTube videos on other dimensional reality or higher dimensional reality, and also reading about quantum physics and stuff, because what we experience in the space is what these people are describing. And so if you can imagine, like it's a very short experience when it's smoked rather than ingested orally. So it's like a blip into a space, and just as you start to reorient to it, you start to come back. So it's a very fast experience. But what it seems to be doing is giving us a capacity to see beyond our perception of three dimensions and time. There does seem to be a space that time does happen, right? Like it's short, it feels short, but there's also a space that feels beyond time, and that's really hard to describe. Or that time becomes a physical territory that can be explored. Einstein talks about space-time, right, as the dimensions of our reality. So what if we could explore time as a dimension, as a spatial dimension, instead of just something that we're passing through moment to moment? And then there's these spaces that seem to go beyond not just time, but possibilities of time. So stepping into future states, possibilities of what you wish to do with your life, or who you really are, like bigger than an individual reality. And then there's spaces beyond that seem like more like the 5-MeO space, but you can experience it of just like a state of consciousness, just a pure being or pure bliss or ecstasy. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, it can feel like a state of pure terror or annihilation. So it's very complex. And so it's very visual, hyper visual, so it feels like you're seeing more colors than you normally see. And it's complex. It's like constantly unfolding, right? Shifting and unfolding would probably be a word I would describe. And that there's something about it also that you don't feel alone in the space, that there's a presence there, whether it's like a states experience where you just feel the presence of something that's beyond us, or it becomes very personalized. You meet beings in this space. And what those are, right, is a really big question. It could be really complex representations of aspects of ourselves, parts, from a psychological model, but they feel very alien and very foreign. Sometimes they appear humanoid or like animals or insects, and then other times they, you could just as easily have a geometric form, a shifting geometric form trying to communicate with you through flashing lights and vibration, sound, and sometimes there's words, but it's more of a telepathic recognition or something. And the most striking feature of these spaces, maybe even more so than the other psychedelics, except maybe really high doses of psilocybin or other medicines, is that this is more real than real feeling. And whether or not that's true, it feels true. Like without a doubt true, because it's like if you were to sit here, like if, I recognize that I'm in a theater right now because I can see you and I know where I am, I know who I am. It would feel like you're very present in this space just like this, except because of these more than four-dimensional process that's occurring, it feels just more real than a typical three-dimensional space. And so I'm really intrigued by this. I'm curious to learn more about not just the presence of the beings or what's perceived as beings, but also what is the space? Where is it that we're going? Is this really just a reorienting to reality or a distortion of reality, or is it somehow objectively real? And is it useful in some way? I know I've had really profound transformational experiences in these spaces, but is it useful even on a societal level? You know, can we use it in a way that supports evolution of our consciousness or sustainability in our ecology, you know, that sort of thing. So that's where my interest is, and we'll probably keep talking about this. You know?
I love it. I love how you're like talking about the reality and the shifts in our brain. Debbie, do you, and I know you have some charts, I would love to get those handed out to you at this moment. What does our brain look like when we're going through these experiences that Daniel's talking about? What's our brain look like?
Yeah, our brain changes for sure. So my husband John's handing out some flyers right now that kind of show a person before and during DMT and then DMT experience, and a little bit about the experience they had. And basically what we see with DMT is that alpha, which is our present moment, our idle speed brainwave, kind of goes away. And we develop gamma and theta at the same time, which really hits our limbic system, that we go back to this old reptilian part of our brain to do that. The back of our head is our occipital lobe. This is our primary visual center. And so there's a bunch of ideas that I'm playing with what is a hallucination, and does it happen in the occipital region? So there was a neuroscientist back in the 1700s that was playing with people that were getting dementia, that would have these hallucinations that are somewhat kind of like DMT experiences, that they would see beings, usually with big mouths and eyes, and they would see buildings and all of this. And he found that with these people, that they did not process in the visual center, but they went to a secondary place in the temporal zone to kind of see vision. So as we look at this, I kind of have a little hypothesis, and of course, we need so much more research, both on the brain and what psychedelics do, to really do this. But my hypothesis, if you look at theta here, and theta is our spacey daydreamy, it is our the awe of life. It's really beautiful, but we're not going to really get much done there. Takes us outside of our body too. That the theta kind of goes to that left temporal area, and I think it's activating what we call the fusiform gyrus in the back of the head, which helps us decipher faces. And so if somebody has damage to that area, they wouldn't recognize people. But I think we go to this place in our brain when we're having these hallucinations, especially when we're seeing these beings, the mechanical elves, the angels, the aliens, the insects, and all our beautiful creatures that come, that we're seeing it through different eyes in a different way. And so that's a hypothesis there. And then everybody talks about DMT being the gamma brainwave, and that is definitely true. Gamma is this high beta on the bottom, so you can see with this person, they had a little gamma beforehand, and then when they went on it, it really went up a lot higher. So basically, anything that's green on this is in normal levels, and then yellow, orange to red, you start to develop more than the average amount. And gamma is the happiness brainwave, exuberant happiness. It's that happiness that you can't hold on forever, that it's a shorter thing, because it really takes all our glucose out of our brain when we stay there for way too long, which is going to be interesting to play with our extended DMT research that Daniel's heading up here. But we go to just this ecstatic place along with new vision, and I so look forward to seeing many more people on this medicine and looking at their brains and playing with that. Another concept I have is, once we know what your pattern is, can I train your brain to go to that pattern without the medicine? So, just a great question. Food for thought.
So John, you just heard Daniel kind of describe the realities and kind of the navigation and the terrain of DMT. You just heard Debbie share what's happening in your brain while you're doing that. You translated that into music. Do you want to speak to your experience a little?
Yeah. First of all, it's great to see everybody here in this panel. It's incredible to be a part of. My experience with DMT came to me initially through a dream. And it was before trying it, I knew very little about it. It was 2012. And it came to me in a dream, and it was vivid, what needed to be done. And I don't know if it was my inner DMT, which is kind of what I've had to explain it as, when I think back to it. And I hadn't tried the substance. And so at that point, I woke up and started writing about what I thought the experience was of DMT. And so it happened to me at the same time, 3:30 in the morning, 2 nights in a row. And I produce music, I record and do production for other artists as well. And through this, I was talking to one of the artists that was recording with me. He's like, you have to finish this idea, this vision. And it was evident I had to. And I wrote verses about what the experience was. So then I started reading about people that were for the psychedelic movement. I found out about Dr. Rick Strassman and what his research was and what was done in the 90s, and then got to meet Dr. Rick Strassman at an event that Daniel actually put on up in Boulder, which was amazing to get to meet him after studying him and having this dream. And I talked to Rich about it, and he asked me if I actually, in the dream, took DMT. And there was no evidence of that. None of that had happened in my dream. But then after researching it, I had to find a guide. And when I did, right after the experience, and a lot of it is explained in what Daniel was talking about and what Rick talks about, in the experience of like the colors, and I had to compose a tune about it. So, and then I wound up finding visual artists and created what I experienced through both my dream state and then through what happened after the DMT experience. And yeah, it was a profound experience. It took me on a journey that was unexpected, but I basically got slapped with the hand of DMT to do this and to talk to people about it and to do the research. And I see the healing medicines in psychedelics and DMT in particular. So that's part of the reason that I'm here to share this. And yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, John. So Skye, we have the description of the reality. We have a description of the brain and what's going on in there. You have the profound experiences that happen within it. How do you hold space for it?
It's a good question. To me, holding space is, there are many different versions of that term, right? There's holding space, which some people find a little too masculine, right? Holding. There's being space, which is a really beautiful term that was shared with me. And then there's also being a witness, right? And for me, in any space, my job is to listen. You know, I'm just there to listen and to be a mirror, right? A set of eyes through which someone is being witnessed, someone's being seen and heard, that they're not being shamed or made wrong for the fact that maybe they're feeling feelings that they've pushed down inside of them for so long, or that they're, you know, maybe making sounds or moving their bodies involuntarily. Sometimes that happens. Body does interesting things while the soul is on its journey. So in being a witness or in holding space for those sorts of things, I just try to be someone who is present, like a good parent would be, right? Because a lot of this work that we're doing is actually a process of almost like individuating from these patterns that were taught to us a lot by parents or early childhood experiences, and actually learning to reparent ourselves. So in holding space for that, just being that space of yes, you know, being that space of you know, reminding them to breathe, reminding them all is well. That those those sorts of reassurances, you know, like any person who's there in a compassionate space. I can just be a mirror for whatever it is that they're going through. And like I said, keep the body safe while the soul is on its journey.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Skye. Questions?
Questions for Daniel. Hi, Daniel. I've seen your videos and I've seen your website and like what you're doing. It's pretty awesome. I was wondering if you, because I don't know kind of when you started it, but I saw that European doctor, and he's kind of working with you guys on the machine to control the levels, right, in the bloodstream for the DMT.
Are you talking about the Imperial College in London?
I think so. Was that?
Or no, you're talking about Andrew Gallimore, aren't you?
Yes.
He was on the.
Right. It was on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have you had any success with putting people in these states for extended periods and extracting some good stuff, like from some entities?
Extract some entities, bring them back, so show them off.
Well, just I'm talking about extracting information.
Extracting, yeah, so no, we're still in the preliminary stages of that work. And just to step back a little bit to share more about what we're doing, Andrew Gallimore, one of the people featured, came up with this idea using Rick Strassman's data from the original DMT experiments in the 90s to use advanced medical technology, fusion technology, and this really complex mathematical equation to stabilize the blood levels of DMT in a person's body. And so when somebody smokes or injects DMT, like Rick Strassman's original research was just a single injection of a dose of DMT, they go up and they hang out in this, what we call these peak, or breakthrough experience states, where they're no longer aware of this reality and they're in the other one. And it's about 4 to 7 minutes, like what he was saying. And with this targeted infusion technology, you can theoretically extend that state twice as long, hours long, even theoretically indefinitely, because there's no tolerance to DMT in the body. And of course, like what Debbie was saying, the body's going to wear out after a while, and eventually somebody's going to have to pee, right? So, so there's going to be some upper limits there, right?
Yeah, we put diapers on.
Yeah, well, that's part of the protocol, actually. I don't want to deal with space pee. So we're in the process. We recruited a crew of about 10 psychonaut volunteers, Skye's one of them, to be the first, we're calling it a DMT expedition, deep DMT space expedition. To me, it's like the equivalent of going to Mars or even further out in the universe. Like it's like the upper edges of what we can do as a psychedelic community. I was really curious to explore what that even meant. And so we've gone through one training retreat to prepare people, and we're doing another one this September. And then starting next year, we're going to a retreat center in another country to start offering DMT medicines to our recruits to further their psychonaut skill development. And so 2021 is probably going to be our first extended state DMT experiment or expedition. I'm trying to, it is an experiment in some ways, but it feels more like an expedition than anything else. So I'm trying to use that language now. And so one of the goals, right? One, I'm just curious. I have to be honest. Like my primary interest is just straight up curiosity. But realistically, our community has the opportunity to help provide solutions to really serious problems. And psychedelics have a track record for providing those solutions, either personally, right? I'm sure many of you can relate to that. I certainly do. That they've really helped me understand not only who I am, but how to live a better life, right? But we could possibly do that on a cultural scale or a global scale. And these medicines have already done that. There's just examples all around us, like my iPhone. Steve Jobs talks about LSD being instrumental in his creative process. And so, once we figure out how to do it and be safe with it, right? We can extend it longer. We can also change the intensity of the experience so that maybe there's threshold levels or peak levels or sub-threshold levels that are useful for this process. But once we figure out how to do it safely, the next step would be to train experts in their fields to do it. And so imagine putting in a environmental scientist through the process, or an engineer, somebody who's working on really complex problems and they're stuck somehow, or an innovation of a idea that could be world transforming. So that's kind of what we're playing with this particular program, and I think I think there's a real potential for something like that to come out of it, and it's already happening. Just the people that are coming together for the program and who are inspired by this idea. We're already it already feels like this idea generator. In some ways, psychedelics create too many good ideas, and you have to sort through them and figure out which one you want to do first, or what's the most important, right? Or we'll keep a house, home over your head and all that. So, but that's the idea of the. It's called the DMTX project, right? And so 2021 will probably be the first expedition, and then 2022 will be opening up to other scientists and training them for it too. So I'm really excited about that idea.
And we actually have some impact event after this. At the very end, there'll be a slide with information. We do offer, or Daniel offers, a webinar that's free, and you can kind of get a download of information. There's handouts and then additional links to explore this space. Any other questions or other questions?
I would love to know if you have any information on how microdosing has helped people with migraines.
Sure. Anybody else?
They're not doing DMT for that.
No, there's not really many people doing microdoses of DMT, but people are, microdosing ayahuasca. LSD for cluster headaches is a really big thing right now. It's been proven to be useful, so cluster headaches, migraines. Ongoing psilocybin microdosing. These are neuroregenerative medicines, and so just general brain health. So I've worked with people in my practice who have had severe neurological disorders, just brain struggles, either through an injury or an illness. And I recommended microdosing psilocybin to them, and didn't really see them for a while after that, like a year or so had passed. And they wrote me and said, Daniel, I really just want to thank you for recommending psilocybin. I've been using it since I saw you, and they were completely different human beings at that point. When you have a brain injury or struggle in that way, it's hard to have coherent sentences. It's difficult to regulate your emotions, and all of those symptoms were dramatically improved. And so there's a lot of research on cluster headaches, and I would just Google cluster headaches and migraines and LSD, psilocybin, and see what you come up with. There's some wonderful regimens now, and a lot of education online around that. And so it's just, like in DMT, I also like to think of it as like a brain vitamin. You just feel better afterwards, more coherent, more stable, and nourished in some way with that medicine. Whereas some of the other medicines that people use, like MDMA, can be draining on the system. Whereas these medicines, when used correctly, right amounts, and not overusing them, of course, can help you feel better, generally speaking. Energized, awake, clear-headed, you know. We also, just to name, like there's some mindfulness practices that we teach that you can integrate with cannabis use that can help clear like really deep tensions that can cause headaches and things. So there's a lot of options for you.
And there's the psilocybin next week, or in 2 weeks, and so since Daniel brought up microdosing psilocybin, that would be a great one to come back to, too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question for Skye as a space holder. First of all, thank you for that. And then with the human condition, there's all sorts of things that need to be unwound, be it trauma or ego or fear, and an assortment of other things, you know, sometimes seeking inspiration. With all the different medicines available, at what point do you facilitate DMT? What is DMT best suited for resolving the human conditions, evolving consciousness?
Good question, and I'll be clear that I don't facilitate DMT, just to put that out there. I have experience with, and I hold space, but just to clarify. And can you? I'm, I guess, a little unclear about the question. Maybe I was just sitting on the wait, I don't facilitate part of that. But can you name that again?
Sorry for the wording there.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I don't feel like DMT would be a good thing to go to help resolve trauma. Whereas I feel like it would be more suitable for helping people find love for God. And I just wondered what other uses you lean towards or lean toward on that.
Yeah, find I love that. Find love for God, which in turn is actually love for self. So
all of us.
Yeah,
We're not separate.
we're just these little fractal particles that are embodied in these great human suits that we get to walk around and like experience each other for a while. It's pretty cool. Yeah, there's different medicines for different things. Part of the integration work that I do is in supporting people and like, what is it that you're working with? What is your history? What are you coming from? What are you working through? What are your intentions? So DMT in the form of, say, like ayahuasca, that's been my greatest teacher. And that could be for people who are dealing with anxiety or depression or these sorts of things. But each medicine has its own little key to a different kind of lock. So I don't know NMDMT. I actually haven't done that yet. So you've got your work cut out for you in this extended state. I was like, wait, what did I sign up for? But yeah, I've seen people coming through Aya circles or even 5-MeO experiences that are breaking through. When you boil everything down, the body. I'm a body worker as well. I use it in the integration work, and the body is like an outer expression of inner truths, right? And we have these tensions or traumas that are stored in the fascia and in the connective tissue and in the muscles of the body, right? And a lot of these medicines help to notice and pinpoint, and then be able to either like burn through it or create space around it, or be able to actually dive into whatever the emotional cause was, whatever the long-held belief was that's manifesting as depression or as anxiety. So these medicines are like, they say that it's like 10 years of therapy in one night, right? So they're really big experiences. So not every person would actually be ready for DMT, right? But there are other things that one can do, like the cannabis work with Daniel, or breath work, or yoga classes, or going on a meditation retreat, right? I like to say many paths, one mountain. You know, it all leads back to the same place.
We have a
Okay.
microphone right
I got a mic right here.
Yeah.
I've kind of been dancing with this cluster of different statements. I'm right here, by the way. And so the brain imaging fascinates me, and my general umbrellaing question is there something that is indicated in the brain waves that is in the same harmony as truth, like capital T truth or objective truth, that when we experience these states and get these either psychic communications or downloads or these knowings, that they are also related to a tangible, grounded understanding of truth in this reality? Because with the degree of separation between the dimensions, understanding and being able to integrate the whatever we gain from the mountaintop to bring back down, is there scientific brain evidence that backs that up?
Good question. We need more research for sure for this. But what is truth? It's really an interesting thing. I've been playing with this, of where would that be in our brain? Maybe the frontal lobes, or I don't know. And I haven't seen anybody really talk about that yet. But what I do see with this, like here we are in these bodies, and in these bodies we feel separate from each other. And when we go on these medicine journeys and we start losing these bodies, we see how we're not separate from each other. And we actually can feel these states of before being alive or after we're dead, and everything in between. That is just amazing. What is truth? And this brain of ours is amazing, what it can perceive and everything. And here it's one of my favorite things to study, but it's also the part that I think messes us up the most. That our thoughts can really limit us and make us a little crazy. So how do we go to our hearts?
Yeah.
Feel that we're all connected, that there is no separation.
Can I add a little bit to that too? I love this topic of fake truth. Like the many paths, one mountain, right? Leading to that truth with a capital T. Like, what is that? I think it can only be experienced, right? And as soon as you experience, it's yours. It's your experience. You have it, and no matter how much you talk about it, right? Language is just something that we use to point to the thing, but it's not actually the thing. Right? So whatever truth is something that's an internal truth. And you can share it with people that you trust, but for them to understand what it is, it has to be experienced as well. Yeah, that's a great little.
You guys are awesome. That being space thing, like I've got that for life now. That's
my friend Kimberly.
Oh, tell Kim thanks.
Yeah.
I have 3 questions. I'll let you guys pick which is most important, and you can go from there. As this stuff becomes more popular, these substances become more popular, what's the role of stewardship for those who disseminate these things? Second question is, since DMT is such a short time, what are the tips to being able to go deeper within that space, right? Like the almost athletics of it.
Like the navigation tools?
Yeah, the navigation tools, right? And then the last one, and this one is particularly interesting to me, is how to invite people of traditional religious practices into this. I mean, I'm not going to go dose a church on Sunday, but it would be kind of fun if that was, permissionable. But anyway, so those are the 3. I'll let you guys go from there.
Don't dose a church.
Not gonna.
They did the CIA did experiments and dosed a town in France,
Right.
and scared the shit out of people. Yeah. It was LSD. They blamed it on the mold and the bread or something. Yeah. To be a good steward, like introduce it to a church and share the idea of it. Breath work, inviting people to step into these medicines in a way that's safe, right? So I get a lot of emails. People want to, and so it's mainstreaming, right? It's becoming more popular, and there's a legitimate reason and a desire not to break the law.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of interest in psilocybin now, and people are looking at maybe flying to Peru to do ayahuasca for their first trip. But there are a lot of options now that are available that can step people into these experiences. And with the psychedelic cannabis work that we're doing is one of them. Breathwork's one of them. There are now ketamine clinics that are available. But the stewardship piece to me is maybe one of the most important, and to name that there are ways to set this up and to do it safely, and that those are skill sets. And there are certain mental health concerns that require additional support. And so don't think of just doing a journey and it's going to cure me of something. That these medicines are really wonderful for supporting mental health and healing areas of mental and emotional concerns. But we underestimate the structure and safety that's required around these experiences. So a lot of education, like psycho-spiritual education, is really important. So I think I just wanted to name that piece. And maybe others can address some of the other questions.
So that you need to be in the right mindset to do this. Like people are always, I want to try DMT, and it's like if and I will not give DMT to people. I do give ketamine to people through a doctor. But to be in that right mindset, you really have to have this calling for it in a certain way. It does take us to other worlds. And then you need to be in the right setting also. So it is driving me crazy when I go to concerts nowadays and I'm smelling DMT. Like, why would you take something that takes you out of your body in the middle of society? Of like, this is such strong inner work. Why aren't you doing it in a beautiful setting with support and love around you versus chaos? And so, like, how to figure that out. And then one of the things that I learned from Daniel is then how to develop the skill. And I think that is also part of your question. There's so many different things with meditation, of looking at space and time, or following, really going into an internal state and figuring out what things are versus just being entertained by the beautiful colors. But the biggest piece is integration. And that we should not be doing psychedelic after psychedelic after psychedelic. We should do a psychedelic and do integration, and really get the healing in our body. When I look at brains on different psychedelics, I see almost every time the healing properties of it. Megan, I looked at this week, and she started off with a little bit of a stressful brain. She's changing jobs this past week, and 45 minutes into the journey, she had a completely healed, beautiful brain. I couldn't even believe it. It was just so magical to see.
Appreciate that.
Can I say something about the stewardship piece? It's such a great question. The stewards, right? Like the people that carry, or the people who are space for, or who are facilitating. There are a lot of facilitators out there who are completely out of integrity, right? So just because someone carries medicine doesn't even necessarily mean they've done the work, right? They might have done the medicine, but have they done the work? Like, who are they being in order to be able to carry this medicine with impeccability, with integrity, right? Yeah, because there's a lot of harm that can be done with these medicines, because they're working on the brain, right? There's like, your brain's important, and so if you can, ask questions, talk to these people. I work with a group out of LA called Aware Project, and the website is awareproject.org. I'm part of the integration team through that group. But on the website, there's a really great resource called the Sitting Safe Guide, and it's questions you should ask yourself before taking a substance, questions you should ask your facilitator, and questions they should be asking you. And if there's any part of that with the facilitator where they don't even screen you, it's a red flag. Where they won't answer the questions that you've asked, red flag, right? So just because a friend of a friend is facilitating 5-MeO DMT doesn't mean that you're like, okay, cool. I did that, it wasn't a good experience. Yeah, needed a lot of integration after. Yeah, it took me about 1.5 years.
Oh, wow.
To be like, that actually wasn't good. You know, like, I had no language for it, there was no integration afterwards. It took me months before another facilitator came into town that actually had an orientation, and I was like, oh, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that in and naming that, Skye.
Yeah.
So, John, I actually have a question for you. So I heard Debbie talk about having the call for this medicine, and Skye talking about like a safe place, and under the umbrella of being a steward. I feel like you took your experience and are stewarding it in terms of education, in terms of sharing your music with the world and being able to navigate that. Can you speak a little bit more about like the value of this type of articulation and sharing of the experience to be able to help educate others?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, education in general about the topic is the biggest advice I can give you, and I'm continually learning myself about where to go. What does it mean? You know, what did this experience have to do with anything? I think the education behind it and my experience of needing to be educated before I went into the space was super, you know, it was healing for me, and it was what I needed. I needed to clear my mind, well hydrated. I was meditating before I went into the space. So I wasn't taking other substances leading into the space, and just learning more, researching online. There's a lot of information out there to learn more about what psychedelics are doing for us, healing and recreational, and how to teach our youth that, because a lot of this is going on in kids. You know I'm guilty of it when I was younger, just exploring with psychedelics, and it's the healing properties are there. DMT is a way stronger, more potent, quicker release if you're talking about the NDMT, and 5-MeO I haven't experienced. So that sounds pretty tragic, your experience, in a way.
It needed to happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So speaking on the education of the topic, you know, if you're thinking about entering into the space or you've entered the space, you probably can agree with me. Just do more research when you enter into it. You know, allow yourself to be present and really understand what you're experiencing as much as you can.
Thank you. I have a question right here.
Hi everybody, thank you again. I have a question for Debbie. I was in a program and we looked at a study from MAPS, and it had to do with the brainwave behavior with ayahuasca. And I'm over here, up here in the right hand corner, your left.
Oh, right, okay, thank you.
I didn't recognize what was going on. So there's a study that MAPS did on 12 subjects from Brazil, and they found that the alpha waves were increasing alongside theta. And so this seems to be a contradiction to that, yet DMT is very present in ayahuasca. So I'm just wondering, like, if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, these are different, even though they still have DMT in it, they definitely have different properties into it. And it's interesting because ayahuasca is one of my biggest healers, and I have probably 6 times had all my equipment with me to measure people on ayahuasca, and every time right before I should not do it, because to me, ayahuasca is a spirit, and it's beyond what our brain can even comprehend. One of these days I'm going to get the courage up to maybe do it though. But I have done pre and post of looking at ayahuasca. And you're right, and I do know that research you're talking about, that we do develop more theta and alpha. It's usually a little bit more of a theta, but it can go into the alpha range. They're close. Theta's 4 to 8 hertz, and alpha's 8 to 12 hertz, and it's the lower alpha that people go into. And it's with that state, alphas are also where we go when we go into REM sleep. And so I think it's a more of a vivid dream place where, and DMT is a different feel of hallucination to me. And so I guess it does the gamma. And so all the different psychedelics have different looks to it, like LSD and mushrooms and mescaline all kind of do that higher gamma routine with dropping out the alpha. And ketamine usually go to a theta state. It can be a theta alpha state and have a little gamma also with it. And the ayahuasca is similar to that. We often call ketamine the little sister of ayahuasca because it has a similar brain look. On most psychedelics, our brains overconnect. And DMT, so far, I have not seen that overconnection, which is really an interesting dynamic compared to other psychedelics, where we're not connecting our brains in certain ways. In fact, we're going the opposite way. So I'm trying to figure out what would that mean? And yeah, so much to look at.
Thank you. Up here in the far, your
Megan,
guys' is upper right?
we have a microphone down here too.
We'll get you, yeah.
Hi, I'm up to the top right. Hi. What an interesting topic. Thank you guys for coming out here. I want to say this as gently as possible, and I'm really glad that the majority of people have really good experiences with this, and there's a lot of healing properties to DMT and a lot of the other psychedelics. I hate to address the giant elephant. We live in an extremely violent culture, and Skye, you mentioned a little bit about the red flags and the ability to abuse these types of medicines. As it gets more and more popular, it's going to be harder and harder to identify those red flags and actually discern if this is right or wrong. And when very much in this type of environment, there really isn't an agreement on truth, on what is right and what is wrong. I really enjoy the history behind this. One of the histories is within, down in Central America and Mexico, where the Mayans and the Aztecs were doing this. They actually performed human sacrifice, and they unfortunately committed atrocities unspeakable, right? And they were, to say that they were doing these on drugs or on DMT, we don't really know, but again, you guys allude to that they were using these in their spiritual practices. So again, understanding that and hoping that you guys are able to again create a well-regulated revolution here of consciousness. I don't know, I find that hard to understand. And again, in our culture, how do we avoid abuse of this? And I guess what I'm trying to link, and I've encountered a lot of people that have undergone a lot of violent trauma, especially generational trauma, and then when they try something like this, what would prevent them from having their own truth, which would lead back to what the Aztecs or the Mayans were doing back then.
Yeah, that's a pretty extreme example.
Well, I agree, but we live in this culture that is really sad and tragic, and I see it every day.
Sure. And so one of the primary useful tools of these medicines is to heal trauma, and it can be done in a safe way. And I don't think it's going to be harder to find the red flags. It'll be very obvious when you encounter somebody, if you're educated on how to talk to them, whether or not they're using these medicines ethically. And so there may not be a true truth, right? T with a capital T, or truth with a capital T. but there's ethical behavior, and those are things that we can agree upon. And so so you speak to consent and right boundaries, and skill set, capacities. Is the person actually trained to do this work? Can you verify their training? Can you ask questions to determine their skill level and who they are? Know them over time. There's a lot of ways you can protect yourself. So I don't think we're going to be victims to like widespread overuse if we can get out of the underground and share what we know. And so I think, and the benefits of these medicines, just statistically, are far greater than any of the risk. And we just, so to give you an example, we just organized our first psychedelic first aid class this weekend. And so we had 20 people come and we taught them how to handle medical emergencies associated with drug use, from overdoses to cardiac arrest and things like that, heat stroke, like things that happen at festivals. And we also, getting an allergy to the medicine and how to handle that. And we also teach them how to discern what a mental health crisis really looks like versus just a big experience, and how to address those in the moment. And so they're whole programs, and we're just one example of this. Aware Project out in LA is just another one of many programs around this. So the demand is high right now, and within this realm, there's a higher potential for abuse for people who, say they're using medicines for healing, who might not be. But we're also teaching people how to call those people out. And so education is going to be your most important key. And how do I say this? Like, discern who you want to be around. That just because somebody uses these medicines, like you're saying, like, doesn't mean that they're going to be enlightened, right? And that there are people who use these medicines to manipulate others, and that's a serious criminal behavior, right? But with education, most of these can be avoided. And so from a psychedelic harm reduction perspective, I think that's important. Also, when you're speaking of truth, there's delusion that looks like truth. It feels like truth to people who feel it. And if you know how to discern what, like if somebody who's speaking from their truth and are authentic about it, they're gonna come off very differently than somebody speaking about like righteous truth and like a prophecy or specialness and why they're the ones. So, those would be symptoms of psychosis and neurosis and like a narcissism, and it can come off differently.
Is a situation as well.
What's that?
Spiritual narcissism.
Yeah, and that's a real thing, But you can learn to discern what that looks like. And so it's not about truth, it's just about safety, and do I consent to whatever experience that this person is wanting me to have, And do I know them to trust them, right? There are a lot of times that people are just like, oh, there's an ayahuasca circle, it must be led by good people. And, that's not actually always the case. And maybe the better word instead of good would be skillful or unskillful, or, and that there are communities, like if you go to an ayahuasca community, they just let you in. It's a religious right. You can take it if you want it. Then there's other communities that say, no, let's do a psych evaluation before you come into this, because we want not just you to have a good experience, but we want everybody in the space to have good experience. And that there are people who are trained in some of these communities, and some communities don't have them, but there are people who are trained to engage in mental health crisis, like right there before it escalates. So safety and containment is a real thing, and the reality is though, like this is like this isn't going away. It's like people smoking DMT at festivals and stuff. Like that's going to continue, and so education is probably going to be the biggest factor here, you know. So you know, letting go of the truth. Just think of, like, I know it sounds weird in this context, but morality and right relationship, and does this agreement I'm stepping into fit my larger needs, right? If it doesn't, then it might not be a right relationship. But if it does, then it doesn't really matter if it's like true or not, you know, if that makes sense. You know, ethics are about social sustainability, and so there's a whole new ethics emerging right now on what right use looks like and right relationship looks like with these medicines, because you know there are groups and you know there's stories of Hitler using mescaline, right, and other things. So just the nature, just the medicines themselves aren't enough, but putting it in a context that is ethical is probably one of the biggest things that we need to address in our communities. So
we could regulate that.
Well, I mean, psychotherapists are regulated. You know, Debi, as a licensed professional counselor, she's required to follow a board, like a code of ethics, and has a board, a regulatory board that keeps an eye on her. There's no reason that, and that if we were to quote mainstream psychedelics, that is obviously going to happen. You know, and there will be people who use among friends, and that's great. And then there will be people who are trained to address significant clinical concerns and with these medicines, and that they will be regulated. And so we don't have that regulation right now. And one of the things we've done with Medicinal Mindfulness is we're accountable to our community. And so all of our forms are online, our full disclosure on fee structures and all of that, and what we are agreeing to. Like we have called a safe community policy. You know, this, if you're coming into our community, you have to agree to this to even hang out with us. And that's not just protect a person, but it's protect the whole community. And so there's models out there, and I would just really encourage you to see what's there, and then the places that may have holes in these models that aren't addressing that, you know, ask the questions. And a respectable guide isn't going to be offended by you asking hard questions around safety and mental health stuff, you know, and right relationship.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hey guys, thank you all so much for being here. We've spoken so much about the distinct reality that this DMT provides, which is fascinating. And I think for my own experience, the bridge between that reality and this one is of the highest importance when we prepare for these journeys. The integration that we've touched on briefly, but also the partner of that in the preparation. And I would love to just hear your personal and professional experiences of best practices, or just you know, most useful tools for us to, you know, be prepared and enter into these experiences with what we intend to work on, or is it better to just allow the medicine to do the work and not have too much in our you know, frontal lobe when we go there? And then also how to best bring the magic home, and how to best, you know, take the value to then integrate into the world and into our communities, which ultimately is the grand goal of these medicines, to that this reality becomes upgraded and improved through that one.
Yeah, I'd love to speak on that. So, like integration work, integration coaching is actually not just integration. That's like the shiny term for it, but it's actually preparation, navigation, integration, right? Mm-hmm. So we have this cycle that happens, right? And hopefully if someone was working with an integration specialist, they could identify, like through one-on-one coaching in advance, or even with a psychotherapist who's working in the psychedelic realms, there's preparation and there's conversation, like what is it that you're working on, right? Like what are past traumas, what is your health, right? So there's like screening and assessment if this stuff is even right for you, what kinds of medicines might be what you're looking for. In my work, I can't refer anyone to facilitator because it's all underground and I'm above ground. But in that, if people find somebody to work with, I can kind of vet them a little bit. Like I be like, oh, I don't hear any red flags for that facilitator, right? I'm not saying, yes, go do it, but I haven't heard any bad experiences. And then working with them to create an intention, right? Like, what is it that you're coming in with? Sometimes people just want to come and meet the medicine, and that's okay, you know, as long as that's what they're clear on. But a lot of people that come and work with an integration specialist are actually working through something, right? There's something that's like stuck, and they want to like explore it and work through it and dislodge it or learn to love it, right? So we have those preparation conversations, what the experience might look like, because unfortunately a lot of facilitators don't give orientations. There are, 5MEO facilitators that fly all over the world. They fly into town, they light a pipe for people, and then they fly out. And for such a big paradigm shifting experience, to me, that is negligent, right? That's why people like me and these integration communities exist, to be able to offer support, to prepare how to navigate within this experiences, what might show up, what would your tools be, maybe establish some practices ahead of time that can then be used as integration tools, right? You like set your new norm, you have your experience, and then you use those as like anchor points for grounding you back into this reality. And there can't be enough said about the importance of community in this work. That community is how we evolved, and it can be a resource. And we didn't evolve alone, so we don't have to go through this alone. Even when you're in a room with ayahuasca with 55 people and you feel alone and you're doing your own work, we're actually alone together. So, allowing that community to be something that you let people know what you're doing, have your experience, and then allow them to be like your spiritual safety net to catch you at the end.
Debi, you're about to share our final thoughts for the evening.
I think it should be intentional all the way. To just pop something in your mouth at the spur of the moment is kind of dangerous. So, really setting that intention beforehand, like when we dream, we usually dream what we see that day. And so why don't we put what we want to see in our medicine journey in front of us that week before, of watching really healthy movies, of looking at beautiful art, of having really lovely, loving relationships. Eating is so important, especially with ayahuasca, that a lot of these medicines work on the serotonin, and if you eat the wrong foods, you can really have a health crisis if you're not eating the right foods, or if it's not a serotonin one, you're gonna purge if you're not right that way. And then afterwards, doing the same thing. So most hallucinogens have this neurohormone growth factor. Basically, it floods our brains for the next week and allows new connections to be made. So my big job as a psychedelic healer is to really encourage those behaviors that you want to take on. So the work is more than the medicine. In fact, the work is more outside of the medicine.
I love that. You guys, I have no idea where the time went, but it's gone. So I'm going to end with, we do have this additional information if you want to check it out, dmtx.org. There's a lot of great information. In 2 weeks, we do have the psilocybin episode, and we do have representatives of Decriminalized Denver, now SPORE, coming to talk to you about some of the stuff that they're learning in the political realm of mushrooms and whatnot. I'm going to ask that these lovely people remain outside where the entry is, so that you guys can talk to them and ask any additional one-on-one questions. Otherwise, you guys, thank you so much. Let's give them all a wonderful round of applause. Thanks, guys. See you in a couple weeks.
So it's in 2 weeks?
So nice to meet you.
Great.
Yeah,
That was fun.
Pleasure. Yeah, it worked out all right. Yeah.
Nice meeting you. Yeah. Coming out.